This peaceful northern coast may look like a land of legends, but it's not what you think. Beneath the silence of the fjords, the Viking world began not with glory, but with blood, hunger, and exile. Before the sails, before the raids, there was only desperation. Frozen soil that refused to feed them, endless winters that stole their strength, families torn apart by famine and fear. This was not a land of heroes. It was a land of survivors, clinging to life while the world around them froze. The people who would one day be called Vikings were not born conquerors. They were shaped by hardship, sharpened by hunger, and bound together by the cold. If they hadn't fought the ice, the storms, and the starvation, the Viking world would never have existed. No longships would have cut through the waves. No raids would have burned across Europe. No sagas would have been sung by the fire. Survival forged their destiny. Every battle they fought began long before they saw an enemy. It began in their struggle to live another day. If they hadn't turned to blood to survive, history itself would look different. The world we know, the kingdoms we read about, the stories we tell, all of it changed because the Vikings refused to die quietly. Their age began not in triumph, but in desperation, and that is what made them unstoppable. The land that forged them was not gentle or kind. It was a place of frozen seas, short summers, and long nights where the sun barely rose above the mountains. The soil was thin, and the harvests failed more often than they grew. Hunger was not a stranger. It was a constant shadow that followed every family through the cold. Villages stood far apart, separated by mountains, rivers, and endless snow. There was no empire to protect them, no king to unite them, only small clans fighting to survive one more winter. Isolation shaped their hearts. When the storms came, people huddled inside smoky halls, listening to the wind howl like the voices of the dead. Every sound outside could mean a rival clan or a hungry wolf. Trust was rare, and strength became the only law that mattered. A man's honor was his weapon, and a woman's courage was her shield. They learned early that weakness meant death, and mercy was something few could afford. The cold didn't just test them, it created them. It hardened their bodies and sharpened their minds. It taught them to endure pain without complaint, and to take what they needed without hesitation. From the ice and rock of the north, a new kind of people were born, people who could survive when others could not. They didn't just live in the cold, they became it. The land carved them into warriors long before they ever set foot on a ship. Before they ever set sail, they turned their swords against their own. The North was not united. It was a patchwork of rival clans, each one fighting for control of land, cattle, and honor. Feuds began over small things, a stolen sheep, a broken oath, a word spoken in anger. But in a world ruled by pride and survival, even a single insult could lead to blood. Villages that once traded with each other became enemies overnight. Brothers who had stood side by side in childhood found themselves facing one another with blades drawn. These were not wars fought for power or conquest. They were wars of survival. Each clan wanted food, safety, and respect, and there was never enough for everyone. The winters grew harsher, the harvests weaker, and desperation turned neighbor against neighbor. Families were burned alive in their own homes. Warriors sought revenge that passed from father to son like a curse. It was a cycle of violence that had no end, only pain. But from that blood came something new. The men who fought these brutal battles became hardened and clever. They learned to strike fast, to move unseen, to fight not for glory but for survival. When the North could no longer feed them, they looked to the sea. The same men who once killed their kin now joined together under one banner, not as enemies, but as raiders. What began as civil war would soon become something far greater, a storm that would sweep across the world. They sailed not for glory, but to survive another winter. When the land could no longer feed them and the old feuds left their villages empty, the sea became their only hope. The waves that once trapped them now whispered of distant shores, of places where food, silver, and life still waited. No one knew what lay beyond the horizon, but hunger does not wait for answers. So they built ships, long, narrow, and fast, and pushed them into the unknown. The first voyages were not made by kings or heroes, but by desperate men with nothing left to lose. The sea was cruel, but it was also honest. It tested every man's courage, breaking the weak and rewarding the fearless. Storms tore their sails apart, icy waves froze their fingers to the oars, and still they rowed forward. They found islands rich with grazing land, villages undefended, monasteries filled with gold. They did not see this as conquest, it was survival. Each raid meant food for their children, warmth for their homes, and the hope of another spring. What began as a fight against hunger soon became destiny. The same men who once fled famine now returned as masters of the sea. They learned the tides, the winds, and the art of fear. Word spread of these northern warriors who came from nowhere and vanished like ghosts. Their hunger had become power, their suffering a weapon. The Viking Age had begun, not from greed, but from the sea's cruel promise that those who dared might live another day. Out of the blood came brotherhood, and the code that held their world together. The Vikings, born from chaos and struggle, began to shape a new kind of order. They had seen enough of betrayal and endless feuds, so they built something stronger than fear, a code of honor. Every man knew his place, every promise was sacred, and every betrayal was punished. Oaths were not just words, they were life itself. A broken vow could destroy a family, but a kept one could unite a clan. Their laws were simple but powerful. A man's worth was not only in battle but in his word. If he killed, he paid with silver or blood. If he stole, his hand paid the price. But more than rules, these laws carried meaning. They were a way to stop the world from tearing itself apart. In a land where death was always near, honor became their only protection. It was the one thing no storm, no sword, no famine could take away. These warriors, once scattered and divided, began to see themselves as part of something greater. Their gatherings, called things, became places of justice, debate, and peace. The same people who had once known only violence now stood together under a single belief that strength meant nothing without honor. The chaos that had once defined them gave birth to a brotherhood, bound not by blood alone, but by a code that would carry their legacy for centuries. They began as the desperate, but became the destiny of the North. What started as a struggle to survive grew into a force that reshaped history. The same men who once fought over scraps of food built kingdoms, forged laws, and sailed to the edges of the known world. Their axes opened trade routes, their ships carried ideas, and their courage carved paths across oceans no one else dared to cross. What was born from starvation became a civilization that influenced the future of Europe itself. The paradox of the Vikings is clear. They lived by the sword, yet built the roots of culture and law. They were feared as destroyers, yet remembered as explorers, traders, and poets. Their strength came from pain, and their glory rose from loss. Every battle, every storm, every life lost in the cold shaped a legacy that still breathes in our blood today. They began as outcasts of the frozen north, but their hunger, courage, and will to endure made them immortal. The story of the Vikings is not only one of war, it is the story of how survival became destiny. If you value stories that uncover the truth behind the myths, subscribe. It helps us bring forgotten strength back to light. Every click, every share keeps the voices of the past alive. These stories remind us where we come from and why courage, loyalty, and survival still matter today. The Viking world was more than battles and raids. It was a mirror of human endurance, showing how far people will go when the world turns cold against them. Tell us, what part of Viking life shocked you the most? Was it their hunger that built empires, or their honor that survived centuries of blood? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep exploring the untold sides of history together. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story that reveals what history tried to hide. If you enjoy stories that reveal hidden truths of history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these forgotten tales of courage and survival alive.